here to talk to us about the changing conditions in Europe and things that are going there. He and I were just talking. It's quite a different visual than what we had years ago. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to General Novalis.
All right, thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. To start off with good afternoon, and looks like I got the post-lunch crew here. That's great. I'd like to just say thanks to Quad A for putting this on. It's always a great privilege to be up here and talking. So today, what I want to talk about is a little bit of different perspective. I know it's Aviation Challenges is on the agenda, but I fail to follow rules sometimes, and I wanted to expand a little bit on basically 20 months of being a J3 and a NATO headquarters stationed in Poland. So, for a little reference, I started my career as a second lieutenant in Germany. Poland was our enemy. I saw it every single day. We went out to our battle positions. We looked at the battle positions. We knew our enemy's terrain. We knew his equipment, and we were ready to go after him. And here I am 30 years later, stationed in Poland. So that's a unique perspective, I think, to have. And just as Tim said, things have changed quite a bit over those 30 years. So what I would like to do is go back to, we'll go to slide 1. So what I want to do is I want to talk basically just 3 slides. Should take me about 15 to 20 minutes. And then I'll open the floor up for questions. But if you see something that you want to talk about immediately, just raise your hand. I mean, this is pretty open and it's informal, and I'd much rather go at it in that direction. So why did I put this slide up? I think we all understand that you got to know your enemy. So for me, I put up basically 4 things that I have seen in the last 20 months that I know about our adversary. In Europe, and I'll give it from my perspective in Europe, there is only one adversary, all right? It's Russia. And you can call them whatever you want, but it's Russia. And that's all the European countries understand that is their adversary. And he is our major competitor. He's absolutely a major competitor. And he has some unique strengths. The first thing is he trains. He is constantly pressing large-scale formations. He moves forces across the country on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. He does snap exercises. These are things that we can't do, but we got to know that he's practicing. And why is he practicing? Because he knows that his main enemy is NATO, European forces, the partnerships that's in Europe, and the United States. And he's ready to get after it, and he practices his skills almost on a daily basis. He also does nuclear triad testing. We see him shooting some of his missiles, practicing it. This is something that obviously we should all be slightly concerned about, for sure. Second thing up there is R&D, constant, adaptive. He tests his equipment in Syria and Ukraine. We've seen him take tanks, planes, new equipment into these combat zones. He tries them out. If they fail, so be it. He loses soldiers testing it, so be it. He brings it back, he adapts it, and he gets it right back into the force. And we're seeing that on a day-to-day basis. Next thing I put up there is Kaliningrad. The Vice talked about it this morning, about aero denial. Kaliningrad is no joke. He is constantly putting forces into Kaliningrad. He's upgrading his missile systems. He's opened up new ranges. How he ties some of his experiences in Syria. He brought back pilots. Russia brought back pilots from Syria, took them into Kaliningrad, and during Zapad, which is his big exercise in 2018, he actually shot air ranges in Kaliningrad, literally 2 to 3 kilometers away from Lithuania. Russia had never used those ranges before. But now he has grown in experience from his combat, bringing those systems back and now testing most of his elite equipment right there in front of us, showing us that's what he does. I mentioned Zapad. Zapad is obviously his big exercise in 2018. kind of reaches back up there to his testing. Zapad was, I think, my impression of Zapad was he actually showed us the blueprint, his game plan for fighting that part of the world. He took 1st Tank Army, he took parts of it and moved it into Belarus, set on the border. All the Belarus armed forces went to defensive positions. He rotated large movements up to the north. He flew his aircraft in Kaliningrad. During that time, he actually brought some of his SS missiles into Kaliningrad. He showed that what he was going to do was take that 1st Army, drive through Belarus, close the 40-kilometer Slovakia gap, connect Kaliningrad with Belarus, go into defensive positions, and then sweep across the Baltics. How do you stop that? We'll talk about that just in a little bit. But he shows it, he practices it, and he's ready to do it. And so, when we talk about getting ready for the next big war, getting ready for our near competitors, this is the guy right here. He's spent 17 years looking at us, and he's getting better every day. Cyber, I put that down there on number 4, which we'll talk a little bit about the cyber, his fake news, his system attacks. He's constantly doing it. He practices it. It's part of war. It's part of their warfare. Okay, that is the bottom line with his cyber attacks. The task force run by the Germans, who are currently in Lithuania, they took that commander through the ringer. They put fake news, insinuating that he was a sexual predator. They put him on Facebook as an anti-Semitic. They attacked him on the news. And for the first 6 months of that colonel's command, he was constantly fighting with the locals, with people to overcome this attack by the Russians on the cyber field. He's pretty good at it. So these are all 4 areas I just threw out there, but just to get us thinking about, here's the enemy that we have to go to fight. And therefore, as we procure, as we look to bring on more capability and technology, listen, we got to make sure our stuff is going to defeat his strengths. Or we have to find out what his weaknesses are and make sure that we can overcome those weaknesses. So I put a couple weaknesses up there. Maintenance of equipment, facilities, his equipment. It's nowhere near 1020 standards, okay? He may say that when he rolls out his tanks for, the tank competition. It's his best tank crew. They probably been practicing for 6 years. It's their best tank. It might be their only operational tank from that sector. They make sure it is the top notch, and when they go into the competition, they're going to try to win it. Conversely, we take we call the Illinois National Guard, and they're over there sitting in Poland. We say, hey guys, send me your best tank crew. 2 weeks before the competition, and we go up there. So we don't want to think that he is invulnerable, because he's not. He does have weaknesses. He has internal lines of communications, so his sustainment is pretty good at the beginning. But we have seen that his facilities, and we've had NATO folks go into Russia to look at some of his exercises, and they come back with some classified documentation of their capability, their sustainment, and that. I can just leave it at that. But he does have his weaknesses. He's not invaluable. We just have to be a little bit smarter than him. Okay, next slide, please. Not to be doom and gloom, but I do want to put up some NATO gaps and talk a little bit about opportunities. The first thing I will tell you right now is we are flat on our butts when it comes to communications. The cabs that have been over there can contest of this. It's hard to talk to people. Every country comes with a different radio. Every country comes with a different secure net. It is horribly horribly not well. I'll just put it that way. But there, you know what? There is ways of getting after this. You know, we are smart enough technically to figure this out. You know, if I can take an iPhone and an iOS structure that's a physical entity and put it on that phone, and then anybody who wants to put an app on that phone simply just figures out how to hook their app into that iOS structure, you're good. We all have phones. You can put anything darn near on them. That's what NATO's going to look for in the future. Okay, both voice and digital. So they're going to construct, hopefully, a backbone. Therefore, any piece of equipment you bring, you just have to figure out the interface between your piece of equipment and this overarching backbone, and then you're going to be able to communicate. That's where the future is going. Once again, for us, you know, we can force people to go to our direction, but we know that in a near competitive environment, we are definitely going to have to talk to our partners, whether it's NATO, whether it's non-NATO, it doesn't matter. Everyone has to be a part of this team. Okay. Common doctrine. I'll just give you an example. Every time we go over there, whether it's Saber Strike, Anaconda, we struggle with doctrine between NATO, though it's all set there, and we understand that it's got to connect, but we have problems. Russia doesn't have that problem. Our enemy does not have that problem. He has one doctrine, and he drives his entire force through that doctrine. So what I give you just a quick example, and this is obviously just from but you say war. But when does war start? And there's a definition that kind of goes behind where war starts. And we Americans, and we look at this continuum of war, and you know, there's this on this side and this on this side, and then somewhere in here we're going to put our finger on this continuum and say, this is war. Therefore, Article 5 for NATO gets executed, okay? But we have to define what that is, and everybody has a different view of where that point on the continuum is. Well, guess what? Russia doesn't have that problem. His continuum starts way over here. He believes that cyber attacks, low-level physical activity across the border is a part of war. He starts his war plans over here. We are going to be maybe years late in getting to the fight if we don't understand that little bit of doctrine. So that's just a strategic level doctrinal talk. I know NATO is having these conversations right now because they're very concerned. When does Article 5 start? We saw what Russia did in Ukraine. If we wait that long with you know, Lithuania or Latvia or Estonia, they'll be taken right over. That's just the way it is. Number 3 I put up there is Medevac. Right now, NATO has very limited capabilities when it comes to Medevac. Air Medevac is almost non-existent. Ground Medevac is limited by infrastructure. To think that in the Slovakia Gap, there's only 2 roads. 2 roads, that's it. You block those 2 roads and you can't even get ground Medevac from what you think would be the front lines back into Poland or Germany. Can't even get through. So as soon as it's blocked, it's going to be congested. We understand that. Most of the hospitals in that part of the world they're great, but they're small. You know, when you talk about Latvia has 1.5 million people total, you know, they only need 6 hospitals pretty much. That capability will easily get overcome in a matter of minutes. And then I'd say that most of the European countries are pretty limited in Role 2s and 3s. Role 1s they got, but Roles 2s and 3s they don't. So this is just part of the game that we have to understand. Put up their fires. Listen, the chief, the vice said it this morning. That's one of the big 6 priorities is fires, lethality. We know we are outgunned, outmanned, and outranged, but we're going to catch up to that. That also goes back to NATO doctrine. We don't have a really good interface in NATO right now to clearance of fires. How do you process targets? You know, how do we get that into the system? Those things haven't quite been developed enough, at least this time. I put number 5 up there because it's kind of an interesting fact, and I'm sure you're probably all aware. There's only 5 countries that meet the 2% NATO standard. I listed them up there. I think our job is twofold. It's figure out, by the way, which countries are going to be the next ones to meet the 2%, and then help them figure out what it is they need to buy. I had this conversation with a couple folks, but maybe a small country, Romania, comes to my mind. They have, they have the money. They're trying to reach 2%. They're going in the right direction. But do they need the Apache? I'm not sure they do. I mean, it's a nice bright star that they would love to have, but maybe there's another capability that would help us execute this next fight over there that does not include that piece of equipment. Now, if they want to buy it, I got it. But I'm not sure that that's the wisest move for that country. And so they got to figure out, and we got to help them shape that and figure out what capability can they actually buy that would actually enhance our ability to fight the fight. And so, Medevac, some of these gaps, some of these opportunities, I think are, some of the things that they will probably be thinking about in the future. I put the last one on there. I know it's not aviation, but it's just an interesting fact that if you want to counter into the Slovakia gap, we're pretty short on bridging to get across all the rivers. Now, there's a classified number of bridging out there. I just put 2 kilometers up there just to let you know that it's pretty large, though. That, whatever it is, it's pretty large. And there's ways around it. I mean, we all understand, prepositioning of forces, prepositioning equipment forward into the battle space gets rid of this problem set. That's obviously one way to get after it. Also, I think speed of intelligence. So, once again, it goes back to that, where is war on the doctrine of the Russians? Where is that spot? And for us, where's our spot? And if we can figure that out quicker and say, you know what, these low-level things he's doing, that's an indication that he's going to go after it, and we move forces quickly. So you can overcome the bridging concept, but that's just an example I threw in there just to show you that the theater is complication. 30 years ago, the theater wasn't that complicated because we had so much forces setting there in front. But this one here is going to be a little bit interesting. Okay, last slide, please. I threw aviation challenges, but to be honest with you, I didn't go into the tactical pieces of this. I strictly wanted to stay a little bit strategic. And when I say tactical, I'm not going to talk about, why aren't our soldiers who are deploying for a year in theater not getting tax breaks, okay? Because that is a tactical, but that sure does have an effect on the morale of the soldiers over there. They're over there for a year, deployed away from their families. So I don't want to get down into those kind of grass weeds. Kane Baker, Steve Napoli, those are folks that can really tell you the tactical piece of the challenges of flying in Europe. But I did throw a couple up there. Once again, I'll go back to the communication packages. Man, Sabre Strike had 19,000 soldiers, 18 different countries, and most of it was done non-secure because we could not figure out how to get encryption across everybody, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that certain countries didn't practice their own, stuff, but when we went in the overarching theme of the operation, we went with non-secure. So that is a problem. We got to try to fix that, especially with aviation. No doubt, if you're flying in Europe, you're going to probably, the distances are so small. You fly out of Germany, you could go across 6 different countries in a span of 1.5 fuel tanks. So it's something we got to think about. Infrastructure. I put infrastructure up there. There's not really much we can do about the infrastructure. The actual ports, where you're going to be, where we would set up our assembly areas. There's nothing I can really do except say that we need to train to overcome the infrastructure problems that are over there. So the days of throwing up camouflage and living in the trees, old school Germany, it's probably coming back. The days of FOBs are going to be gone if we're fighting in that. Because we'll go back to slide 1 there. Don't go back to slide 1, but slide 1, and I was talking about Kaliningrad, and that aerial denial system has the capability to target darn near halfway into Germany from Kaliningrad. If you put your aviation assembly area out there, it's going to last about 2 hours because they're going to fly a UAS over top of you, they're going to see you, and then they're going to target you. And that's exactly what they did in Ukraine. They will do it again. We've seen them practicing their UAS in Kaliningrad all the time. It's just a matter of facts. So that fight is going to be very complicated. And getting our capabilities of training and living in field environments and off of FOBs is going to be probably a key piece of winning that war. Finally, I put ranges up there. Ranges are a problem for our Apaches to shoot, but there are a couple places, very unique places that you can go. Poland is doing a great effort. By the way, 20 months in Poland, I will tell you, I loved it. It's an amazing country. If you ever get a chance, you should go there. But they love us. They never want to repeat history, and they understand that they lost World War II twice. They lost to the Germans and they lost to the Russians, and they are still. They wear that badge on their shoulder all the time. That's why they want to be our partners. But they are doing great things on ranges, state-of-the-art stuff they're building right now. So we're going to have that capability setting there. The second place is Latvia. They're building, literally, I went up to Latvia when they were talking about building a state-of-the-art range basically for us because they don't have anything that they need a range like that. They literally showed me a forest and said, in a month, we're going to cut it down and build you a range. That is the kind of partners we have over there. And it's all about not repeating history. That's really the bottom line for them. Okay, so I've spent about 24 minutes kind of meandering around there. But I want to get some of my thoughts out. And I know it just wasn't Aviation Challenges, but I just want to get some thoughts out there for you. So what I'd like to do is just open the floor. And if there is another questions, then I will gladly step over and hand it over my friend from First ID, but 2ID. But if there is anything that we want to talk about, I'll be glad to answer questions.
Test.
Hi, Sydney Friedberg, Breaking Defense. I'm half Latvian, so I get a little twitchy.
Love your country. Beautiful place.
I've never been there. They kicked my ancestors out a long time ago.
Make the trip.
My brother went over there for a while back. But it sounds like you were saying that the operational design for Russia is probably basically close off Suwalki Gap and secure their flank in Kaliningrad first, and then turn and roll up the Baltics while they keep us from intervening because they've got that solid line across. A, am I getting you right? And B, what options does that give us in aviation but elsewhere? We're presumably not going to build a new Maginot line across Suwalki, and if we did, they'd probably have the engineering to crack it open anyway. So there's got to be some kind of approach to disrupt that first army advance that you talked about, rather than waiting for them to, actually physically storm into the Baltics.
Okay, great question. It's kind of a loaded question. I will tell you, first of all, the scenario that I depicted is what they showed us in Zapad. Okay, I'm not sure that's their main objective, but they definitely showed through their actions during that exercise that this is how they want to take it. And it makes absolutely military sense. Your question is, how do we deny them that? Well, once again, it's about speed of intelligence. We have to consider the fact that he is going to not just one day. And by the way, all intel shows us he's not like an imminent attack. But we would have to consider that he would start with low-level cyber. He would, start with his little green men coming across the border. He would start showing us indications that this was, going to be his primary course of action. And based off of that, that's where we would have to obviously, push forces forward quickly, get to the Suwalki Gap, hopefully get into defense so that he cannot close that off. I'm just, saying this is how I would see us being able to do it. But the more important part of it is just deterrence. You know, we have 4 task forces over there right now, setting in each of those 4 countries. You know, we have the British up in Estonia, we have the Canadians in Latvia, we have the Germans in Lithuania, and Americans in Poland. And those task forces give us the deterrence we need. So right now, I don't see like next month this scenario playing out. But that doesn't mean that they're not training and practicing it. And if the opportunity arises, I would not hesitate to say that they would probably take advantage of it. But the deterrence is there, and the deterrence is working. And well, yeah, I don't want to get down into the tactical weeds, but let's just say that, yeah, understood. You know, you can depict any kind of scenario you want. Speed bumps. I mean, we said the same thing about that when we were, you know, sitting in Germany 30 years ago. When the Russians came across, the Fulda Gap, they were going to be able to just roll right over us. Well, you know, we have some other capabilities that don't allow that to happen. So, but thanks for the question. Yeah.
Hi, Garrett Green with Flight Global. I'm trying to better understand the state of European allies.
Okay.
So what would happen, and this is kind of a bold question, but what would happen if the USA wasn't in Europe, and what are the weaknesses of our European allies against Russia? What are they lacking?
Well, I think you just go back to that one slide I threw up there. You know, there's some gaps in NATO, right? I mean, we're short some Medevac, we're short some fires capability. You know, there's other, you know, you can probably look at the force structure and say, you know, I mean, Germany literally in the last 15 years got rid of all their air defense artillery, right? It's open knowledge. So is that a gap? Absolutely. So America brings those capabilities right now. So obviously, if we step back from our responsibilities in Europe, which I absolutely do not think we are. In fact, I think we're moving to better our position. That's what we're doing. We're bettering our position every single day. A whole bunch of different exercises that we run. Our American forces are directly involved with that, and we want it to be better. So, okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Jen Johnson with Defense News. I had the opportunity to cover both Anaconda as well as Saber Guardian.
Yeah.
And I remember back at Anaconda, the conversation was that communications, as you said, you were flat on your butt when it comes to communications and interoperability with NATO partners and allies. Same thing with Saber Guardian, but I think there was more of an effort to become more interoperable in a variety of ways. But it sounds like you're still facing the same problem. Is there any areas that you've seen some improvement in? Can you detail those? And where do you still see some gaps here, or are we basically still back where we were 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a communication guy, so I'm stepping a little bit out of my lane here. But I will tell you that NATO, I'll use NATO as an example, okay? NATO understands the problem. I mean, we talk about it every single day. Okay? We are looking at, NATO itself is looking at some kind of common architect, which I described before, where you have this backbone that you can, with an interface, you can bring any system onto that backbone, okay? That's the future. They're looking at it and talking about it. But as you're well aware, NATO is more than one country. And we have, industry constraints, and some countries don't want to use that because they believe their system's better. And that's even the United States. We are probably the biggest problem sometimes. During Saber Strike, I think I mentioned it yesterday, but during Saber Strike, we had all these forces coming into the theater. We had 82nd dropping in. We had vehicles driving from X to Y. And how do you keep track of all of that in a partnership kind of arena, okay? Well, NATO made every single force go to a NATO system and put their stuff in, except for one country, us, right? We're bringing the most stuff in. So here is, NATO has a great solution. They have a system. Everybody's put their stuff into the system. It works. They can see the visualization of the battlefield, where all the forces are moving, who's coming where, all except for the United States. So, simply, General Cavoli said, you guys, Americans, get on that system. So we formed a cell up in Szczecin, Poland. We brought all the entities together that did movements, sustainment, to include 21st sustainment. They came up, they put a cell in there. We inputted, soldiers had to do this though, they inputted all the data of the American forces coming in for Sabre Strike into the system, and boom, like that, we had a complete common operating picture. It's just an example. Are we moving in the right direction? Absolutely. If Sabre Strike can do it, we can do it in other exercises, and we'll get better and better. But is there a common architecture out there yet for us to all be a part of? No. Someone has to design it, someone has to pay for it, and there's a lot of companies that want it. Remember, NATO, and I keep reminding myself every day when I worked in NATO is a political entity. They sometimes do not take best military advice. Because NATO, everyone that's in there is looking out after the best interest of their country, which makes total sense. I mean, I would too. But at the end of the day, there's got to be some common ground where we come together and figure this out. Otherwise, when we go to fight that guy over there, we're going to find ourselves lacking in a very key, piece of our command and control assets. Yep. Okay, I think, was there another one, Joe?
I think we're about out of time, so we'll let him tackle you after we get done.
All right, I appreciate everybody's attention, and thank you very much.
General Novalis, thank you.